When people say that money is cheap, they don't mean money is cheap for everyone. What they really mean is that some people can borrow for 30 years at low single-digit rates, while others are stuck borrowing short-term at double-digit costs. That gap has very little to do with effort or intelligence. It's about who the system is willing to lend to cheaply. Cheap money shows up as mortgages, corporate debt, and asset-backed loans. Expensive money shows up as credit cards, personal loans, and consumer debt. And in this video, we're going to explain who actually gets access to cheap money, who doesn't, and why that single difference explains how some people keep winning even when they make mistakes. So first, let's clarify what cheap money actually means. Most people misunderstand the term. They assume it means borrowing is easier across the board, that money becomes cheaper for everyone at the same time. But that's not how the system works. Cheap money doesn't apply to all money. It applies to a very specific category of loans, governed by very specific rules that most people never touch. Cheap money has 3 defining characteristics. First, low interest. Not slightly lower, but rates that sit close to inflation, sometimes even below it. These loans are designed for stability, not speed. Second, long duration. Cheap money is stretched over decades, 20 years, 30 years, sometimes longer. And that time component matters more than most people realize because it converts pressure into patience. Third, and most important, collateral. Cheap money is almost always backed by assets the lender can seize if something goes wrong. Property, businesses, securities, or cash flow producing assets. If a loan doesn't have all 3, it isn't cheap money. It may look manageable at first, but it behaves very differently under stress. To make this concrete, cheap money looks like a 30-year home loan. It looks like a corporate loan backed by revenue and physical assets. It looks like margin lending secured by stocks. It looks like institutional credit backed by real collateral. These loans share something crucial: flexibility. They can be refinanced. They can be rolled forward. They can survive bad timing. Now compare that with expensive money. Expensive money looks like credit cards, payday loans, personal loans, and short-term consumer credit. Interest is high, timelines are short, and rules are rigid. Miss one payment and penalties appear immediately. There's no patience built into the structure. What confuses people is that both systems exist at the same time, often inside the same banks, using the same currency, under the same financial system, but they behave completely differently. When central banks cut rates and headlines say money is cheap, they're talking about the cost of borrowing inside the cheap money system. They're not talking about cheaper credit cards or easier consumer loans. They're talking about long-term, asset-backed borrowing becoming cheaper for borrowers who already qualify. For everyone else, money often stays expensive or becomes even more expensive. This is the distinction most people miss. Cheap money isn't something you accidentally stumble into. It isn't temporary. It's a category of financing reserved for specific borrowers. And until you separate cheap money from consumer credit, it's impossible to understand why some people can borrow through crises, buy assets during downturns, and survive mistakes that would destroy others. Once that line is clear, the next question becomes obvious. Who actually gets access to cheap money? And the answer isn't complicated, but it is uncomfortable. Cheap money flows to borrowers the system considers safe, controllable, and recoverable. That creates a very clear hierarchy. At the top sit governments. Governments borrow at the lowest rates in the entire system, often for decades at a time. They can do this because they control taxation, currency, and law. If something goes wrong, they don't fail the way individuals do. They restructure, inflate, or change the rules. That makes government debt the baseline for cheap money. Next come banks and large corporations. Big institutions borrow cheaply because their risk is spread out. They have diversified income streams, regulated balance sheets, and political importance. When they're in danger, the system steps in to protect itself. Not out of kindness, but because letting them fail would cause widespread damage. This is why large corporations can issue long-term debt at low rates, while small businesses usually can't. It's not about effort. It's about systemic impact. After that come asset owners, individuals or entities that own property, businesses, or sizable portfolios. They qualify for mortgages, asset-backed loans, and margin credit. The reason is collateral. Assets give lenders something tangible they can value, insure, and sell if needed. That makes the loan recoverable, which lowers its cost. This is why someone with a house and average income can borrow more cheaply than someone earning more but owning nothing. Below asset owners are high-income, stable professionals. Doctors, executives, partners, senior specialists. Not because income is magical, but because predictability matters. Long employment history, steady cash flow, and low volatility reduce perceived risk. Even without major assets, this group can sometimes access longer-term, lower-cost credit. And then there's everyone else. People with volatile income, little collateral, and short financial timelines. This group does not get cheap money. They get credit cards, personal loans, and short-term debt. The system isn't asking who deserves cheap money. It's asking who can borrow without threatening stability. Once you see that, the pattern becomes obvious. Cheap money flows upward toward borrowers who can absorb shocks and survive mistakes. Expensive money flows downward toward those who can't. That's why the phrase, "money is cheap," is misleading. Money is cheap for people who already qualify for cheap money. For everyone else, it never was. So why does the system work this way? Because of risk control. Lenders don't think in terms of potential. They think in terms of failure. Every loan starts with the same question. If this goes wrong, how much damage does it cause, and how much can we recover? That single question explains almost everything. This is why collateral matters more than character. Assets can be valued, insured, and sold. They exist independently of the borrower. People don't. People lose jobs, get sick, move, and make mistakes. From a lender's perspective, that isn't moral failure. It's uncertainty. Assets reduce uncertainty, which lowers risk. The same logic applies to institutions. Large banks and corporations borrow cheaply because their collapse wouldn't stay contained. A major failure would freeze payments, dry up credit, and damage the entire system. Lenders know this, so they price in the expectation that intervention will occur. That expectation lowers perceived risk, and lower risk means lower interest. Individuals don't get that protection. If an individual fails, the damage is limited. There's no emergency rescue. The loan is fully exposed, so it's priced that way. Stability matters for the same reason. Predictable income is easier to model. Payments are easier to forecast. Defaults are easier to manage. Volatility does the opposite. Variable income increases uncertainty, and uncertainty raises cost. This is why the system often rewards stability more than ambition. So why is access to cheap money so powerful? First, it changes how debt is handled. People with cheap money don't rush to eliminate debt. They roll it forward. They refinance, extend, and restructure. Bad timing doesn't force immediate decisions. Volatility can be waited out. People without cheap money don't get that luxury. Short-term, high-cost debt creates urgency. Payments arrive quickly. Interest compounds fast. Mistakes become immediate crises. Instead of asking, "Is this smart long-term?" they're forced to ask, "Can I survive this month?" Second, it changes how risk works. Cheap money allows for calculated risk. Assets can be bought and held. Being early isn't fatal. Without cheap money, risk becomes dangerous. A bad year isn't a setback, it's an exit. Avoiding risk becomes rational, even when upside exists. Third, it changes how inflation works. With long-term, low-cost debt, inflation quietly benefits the borrower. Asset values rise while the debt stays fixed. Over time, the real burden shrinks. With short-term, high-cost debt, inflation makes things worse. Costs rise immediately. Interest adjusts upward. Debt gets heavier, not lighter. And finally, it changes failure. In the cheap money system, failure is often partial. Losses are spread out. Capital survives. In the expensive money system, failure is fast and final. Penalties arrive before lessons can turn into experience. This creates a loop. Cheap money creates flexibility. Flexibility improves positioning. Better positioning leads to even more access to cheap money. Meanwhile, those without access are forced into speed, safety, and short-term thinking. The uncomfortable truth is that most people will never gain access. Cheap money requires assets that can be valued, insured, and sold. But those assets are hard to acquire without cheap money. It's a circular gate. Without assets, you don't qualify. Without qualification, building assets is slower and riskier. Cheap money also assumes long timelines. Most people can't operate on decade-long horizons. Bills are monthly, emergencies are immediate. Short timelines force short-term decisions. You can do everything right and still be locked out, because the system doesn't ask if you're trying. It asks if it can recover the loan if you fail. That's why access to cheap money clusters. Why the same groups keep gaining flexibility while others feel like they're permanently playing on hard mode. And once you see it, you can't unsee it.